Hello everyone and welcome back to a short reviews video for September 2020. It's a series with albums that I sort of liked or slightly disliked, and I didn't have that many things to talk about, so I decided to just put them in this segment, say a few things about them, and you might find something to your liking. So with that being said, let's just jump straight into the video. At first we have this short EP that is a collaboration between MSC and The Body. This EP was certainly interesting. I found that some of the industrial and the power noise elements were kind of intriguing, but I really didn't like the whole sound of this thing and the production. For someone who is a fan of dank and overly distorted sounds, in this particular occasion so many of the distorted elements just sounded way too cheap, and texture wise this project was awful. Like, I really didn't like some of the mixing elements on this whole project, how loud it was and how just weak most of the distorted elements would sound on this project. However, I find that there are still some intriguing ideas. I like how varied this project is, considering how short the tracks are, how short this project is in general, and I find that there is a nice chemistry in this collaboration. However, yeah, it's not one of those works from the Body catalog that I'd see myself coming that much back to. Surprisingly enough, I didn't find the new album from 6ix9ine to be all that bad. Yeah, that's surprising, but in my opinion Tattletales has some bangers to it, and honestly when it comes to the more aggressive elements of 6ix9ine, I do enjoy some of the instrumentals, some of the deliveries, even if they're quite formulaic. For me this is another album that's ruined by the awful by the numbers Latin pop tracks and the overall cringy and excruciating auto-tune vocals from 6ix9ine. Like, honestly, I ended up enjoying tracks like Gooba and Trolls, but yeah, for the most part it's a very mediocre album, and I'm not even going to try and get into this whole thing of how much of a meme personality 6ix9ine is and how he just basically uses his whole persona in order to just try to be relevant in any sort of way. I'm just going to leave it at that and say that musically wise this is not as much of an excruciated album as I thought it was going to be. Never was a fan of the Flaming Lips. Can't say that this album managed to really change my mind on that. Well, at least it wasn't as god awful as the one album they did with Deep Valley the same year, which in my opinion it was a really awful album. Like, this is definitely going to land in my worst albums of this year, but fortunately American Head has more of a saving grace to it. But it's another one of those albums that I found to be forgettable, quite mediocre, and another standard formula of neo psychedelia that we've been familiar with Flaming Lips for a long time. They have some more refreshing and more new ideas over here, but for the most part I don't think that they necessarily work to their favor. They're just here in order to just have something to make the album stand out. Yeah, overall another album that I didn't really care for. Almost 1 month later and we already have a brand new A.G. Cook album. Apple in comparison to 7G is a much shorter album that goes for around 39 minutes and being only 10 songs. With that alone, it's much more of a saving grace, the fact that this album is not overblown by so much unnecessary material. But even with that being said, this is another really chaotic mess of an album. This is another album with no sense of direction. It's so all over the place and it doesn't always work that greatly, especially when it comes to some of the more pop elements. I don't think there's something that great. Overall, more of a bearable album, but still another work from A.G. Cook that I didn't really care for the most part. This over here is a Greek dungeon synth project by the person behind the project of Spectral Lore. And this is definitely not your standard dungeon synth project, as it has more of like elements that would give the feel of a video game soundtrack, like elements of RPG sounds, and overall electronics that would give more of a gaming feel to it, but I still couldn't really get into this album, unfortunately. As an idea, it's unique, it's interesting, but in its execution at some occasions I wasn't really feeling it all that much. Really long album, a bit messy, and quite a few forgettable tracks. I do recommend it as it's one of the more unique dungeon synth projects to find out there. It's just not for me. Moor Mother's new project is interesting to say the least. I didn't quite expect something like this, but I think that this is going to be one of my favorite works from her. It's separated in 4 acts and it contains some of the most intense avant-garde jazz and free jazz elements I've heard in an album recently. Like, the performances on this album are extremely intense. You're constantly on your edge of your seat. This album is definitely quite dynamic. I really like the production and the whole sound to it, and I overall find that it's really well put together with a combination of the jazz poetry elements. It's just not one of those albums that I see myself coming that much back to. I like the intensity of this album, I like how energetic and just how heavy it is, but it didn't really have something that much memorable to it. I still though find that it's an interesting project and one of the better ones I've heard from the whole Moor Mother catalog so far. Joji's second album Nectar certainly feels his most balanced and his most well-developed project so far. Compared to the extremely average debut, this one feels much more focused, and I find that some of the main singles are certainly some of the greatest material we've heard from Joji, and also having some of his greatest vocal deliveries yet. He's definitely developed himself as a musician. There are still though moments that I didn't really see myself caring all that much. As a whole thing, it's not that much of a gratifying experience, but it's certainly improved compared to everything he has done before. The Ascension is a brand new album from Sufjan Stevens, which in my opinion ends up becoming one of the best projects he has done recently. This more electronic direction on like art pop and indie-tronica could have easily meant for a really poor album, especially considering how much of an underwhelming project it was Aporia that he did the same year, which was such a basic progressive electronic album. However, this one over here feels much more developed with some interesting songwriting and overall some really interesting ideas and electronics that have elements from like IDM and glitch pop and overall some drone and some ambient. And yeah, I think it makes for one of the better projects he has done recently. However, Ascension has some major flaws, especially coming with the length of this album. This is such a long album with so many tracks, and there are quite a few moments on the track listing that don't really shine. Also, I find that the production in the most part it's quite bland and average, and not one of the strongest vocal performances from Sufjan Stevens overall. But other than that, I was pleasantly surprised with some of the results that would come up with this project. As an overall thing though, it can definitely become a bit boring after a while, and it has some slightly more forgettable moments. I was quite anticipating the new album from Anna VONHAUSSWOLFF, considering that I really enjoyed her previous work, Dead Magic. However, All Thoughts Fly is a much more different album. Really minimal drone pieces of church organ that for the most part are extremely repetitive, really one-dimensional. I was bored with this album, unfortunately. And also, being an instrumental album, not having vocals, like the vocals is one of the strongest parts in an Anna VONHAUSSWOLFF album. So with that missing, yeah, it feels kind of an empty album in some occasions. I have to give it though that at certain points it can become really loud, and the overall production in this album is amazing. Like the final minutes on the track All Thoughts Fly, they're just majestic, extremely loud and extremely well produced. But overall, I really couldn't get into this album. It was such a boring and forgettable experience. Heavy metal outfit Hittman made their comeback album after almost 27 years, and it's a brand new release from the Greek label No Remorse, and honestly this is one of the most interesting heavy metal projects I've heard recently. I mean, I'm not really a huge fan of the genre and I don't really enjoy every single moment out of this album. Not every single track hit as hard, but in my opinion this is a quite interesting heavy metal album that fans are definitely going to enjoy, and I do highly recommend this for fans of more recent heavy metal stuff. Holy crap, this album cover is extremely brutal, like I cannot show this. Now this project basically has the formula that you would expect from Niku Daruma. It doesn't really make something all that different. It has its moments, but it's certainly not one of the most engaging projects from Niku Daruma, nor it is that much of a disturbing or an impactful harsh noise project. Overall, I find that this is an album that I enjoy from Niku Daruma, but that's pretty much about it. And that's all for today's short reviews video for September 2020. What's your opinion in any of those albums? Like them, dislike them, why, and what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.